This is Gaming Through the Ages, and today we're taking a look at Getsu Fuuma, or The Legend of Getsu Fuuma for the Famicom. Getsu Fuuma is among the many classic Konami games from the 8-bit era, but many of us have never heard of it. That's because it was never localized, and outside of a few cameos in other games, including DLC for Castlevania Harmony of Despair, Getsu Fuuma is rarely mentioned. Throughout the game, you play as Getsu Fuuma on a journey to reunite 3 Hadoken, or as I like to call them, Surge Swords. They could also be translated as Wave Swords or Pulse Swords or something of that nature if you prefer. These swords were wielded against Ryukotsuki, or the Dragon Bone Demon. During the battle, both of Fuma's older brothers were killed, and Fuuma intends to restore peace to the land, all the while getting his vengeance. While the story isn't anything spectacular, it's certainly serviceable for a Famicom game. Getsu Fuuma is split into 3 different types of gameplay. Initially, you traverse the land from an overhead perspective similar to The Legend of Zelda 2. Here you can enter areas where you can get advice or healing, enter shops, or enter action sections. You can also access 3 main dungeons where the game switches to a 3D dungeon crawler perspective. The aforementioned action areas make up the majority of the game, however. In these areas, the game switches to a side-scroller. Fuuma starts the game with a sword, which strengthens slowly as you kill enemies. This is depicted by the topmost bar on the left side of the screen. Once the bar fills, the sword's strength is maxed and remains so throughout the rest of the game. Below this bar is Fuma's life bar. Fuuma starts with 3 lives, but the game offers infinite continues and there are some extra lives scattered throughout the world. There are also items which can be used in these action sequences, whether found or obtained through shops. By pressing start, you can cycle through offensive weapons with the B button or defensive items with the A button, then press start again to equip what you've selected. It can get annoying having to re-equip items each time you enter an action area though. As Fuuma defeats the enemies on screen, they often drop money or souls, which give you health. Money can be used to buy items in shops, which is sometimes necessary, but losing all of your lives will cost you. The other major gameplay areas of Getsu Fuuma are the 3D dungeons. These areas are essentially large mazes, with enemies, items, NPCs, and even money-making bonus areas strewn throughout. When facing enemies within the maze, you can jump and slash towards the enemy or slash sideways to try to hit the enemy's face. There are also items such as the candle and compass which are specifically for navigating these areas. Once you make it to the end of the maze, the game resumes the side-scroller gameplay style for the boss encounter. The graphics in Getsu Fuuma are pretty impressive. There are plenty of large, colorful sprites, and slowdown was non-existent outside of a few areas towards the end of the game. The stages and enemies are also nicely varied and creative. Likewise, the sound and music is exactly what you would expect from a Konami game during this era. It's excellent. As for the language barrier, there is a translation on the net, but it's a bit old and I don't think it's really all that necessary. Most of the items are shown as pictures and don't have in-game descriptions anyway. There are 2 elements which may throw you off if you don't understand Japanese. Throughout the game, you have to collect 3 masks, which act as keys to go through certain gates. For the most part, these won't be an issue as long as you're exploring, but one of these requires you to repeatedly go back into a section and pester someone until he gives it to you. Without knowing what he's saying, this part might be easy to get stuck at. The only other issue might actually be the password screen. Unless you know hiragana, it might be a good idea to take great care writing the characters down. Even knowing hiragana, I almost screwed up a couple times. Some of the characters are somewhat similar, but these mistakes were really because the font was hard to read on my television. Overall, I highly recommend Getsu Fuuma if you find the footage at all intriguing. Last I saw, the game wasn't terribly expensive, but can randomly be a little hard to find. The game's difficulty is neither too easy nor too hard, especially once you obtain some of the fun later weapons and can obliterate many of the enemies. I had an absolute blast playing through this. I will note that the game is short for a game of this nature. The biggest lengthening factor is the maze-like quality of the overworld and boss dungeons. That being said, if you like making maps while you play, that won't be an issue, and you can probably fairly easily beat the game over a weekend. Overall, I thought this was just as worthwhile as many of the NES classics.